Hi, and welcome to this tutorial where we're going to learn how to create a drum kit out of the samples that we recorded previously. The first step is to open an instance of our sampler. In this case, I'm using Kontakt. Then I'm going to create a new instrument by pressing Files and selecting New Instrument. This gives me a brand new instrument that has no samples at the moment in it, so at the moment doesn't create any sound when I press my controller. Then I'm going to step into the editor of the instrument, and among all the different panels that I can access, I'm going to select Mapping Editor. This is where I map my previously recorded samples to keys, basically creating zones. Then I'm going to select the samples that I'm going to work on. For this simple kit, we're going to create a bass drum, a snare drum, and a hi-hat. So first, I'm going to drag my samples and I'm going to organize them by a piece of the kit. So as you can see here, I have different type of samples or categorized by the type of sample, so snare drum, hi-hat, bass drum, and also by the dynamic. So for the snare drum, I have piano, mezzo forte, forte. As you can see, I also have different variation for each dynamic that I labeled from 1 through 4. So let's work on a snare, and I'm going to import the samples variation number 1, piano, and I'm going to drag it on D1 key. Then I'm going to resize the zone. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that now that zone is applied only to my D1 key, so that when I press it, I can hear my sample. Then I'm going to import a second dynamic. I'm going to import my mezzo forte, always variation 1. And before moving it right back on the D1 key, I'm going to just reduce the dynamic at which the first sample is going to be played back. That allows me to see better and position better my second sample. Basically, as you can see, I have the snare piano, snare mezzo forte, and now I'm going to import a snare with a forte dynamic. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to place it on my D1 key. But what I'm going to do first is to make sure that it plays only with a MIDI velocity about 64 and up. So as you can see, now I have my 3 dynamics for my snare: piano, mezzo forte, and forte, and they overlap, as you can see, so that I can eventually have a smooth transition between the 3 samples or the 3 dynamics. Pay attention particularly to the information up here about each zone. So if I click on the first zone, it's going to tell me the type of sample. This is my piano dynamic. And also it tells me the range, D1 to D1, and the velocity range. In this case, the piano sample is going to be triggered by MIDI velocity from 1 to 48. The mezzo forte sample is going to be triggered by velocity between 34 and 86, and my forte sample with dynamics between 64 and 127. So now when I press the D1 sample, you can see how the 3 samples are triggered by different MIDI velocities. In order to smooth out the transition between the 3, I'm going to select them all I'm gonna right click and select the batch tools. And in the batch tools menu, I'm gonna select auto apply crossfade by velocity. By doing so, automatically each zone fades into the previous one, giving me a very smooth transition between the zones. Now, once you go ahead and do the same for the kick and the hyatt, both open and closed. As you can see, I programmed my kick with different velocities assigned to different dynamics, my snare, my closed hi-hat, my open hi-hat, and my hi-hat played with the foot. For the closed hi-hat and the open hi-hat, I only have two dynamics, piano and forte, and same thing for the open hi-hat. One of the things that we're going to learn now is how to group zones so that I can assign priorities for when I play the same piece of the kit that is assigned to the same zone. A typical example would be the hi-hat, where I don't want to have playing at the same time the zone of the open hi-hat and the closed hi-hat, because that wouldn't make sense on a real drum kit. And so I need to make sure that they belong to the same zone, and then make sure that only one voice, one sample can be played at the same time for that specific zone. To do so, I'm gonna first select all the zones that I want to belong to the same group. And then I'm gonna right click or control click, and I'm gonna select move zones to new empty group. Now, Kontakt created a new group that contains all the zones that I've selected, in this case all the zones of the hi-hat. To see the new group, I can simply go to the group editor and I can see my new group being right there. If I want to rename the group, just double click, and this is going to be my hi-hat group. The cool thing is that once you have a group and it's selected and it's checked, which means I'm editing it, down here I can select which type of voice group this group belongs to. So I'm going to just pick one. I have several available, but I'm simply saying this group is assigned to voice group 001. And here's telling me how many voices can play at the same time in that particular group. So in this case, the hi-hat group can only play one voice at the time, which means when the open hi-hat is playing, nothing else in that group can play at the same time. So if I play the open hi-hat, I can close it with any other sample assigned to the same group. In this case, with the closed hi-hat or the foot hi-hat. Now I have an effective way of recreating what happens on the real drum kit when the drummer plays the hi-hat.